Welcome, everyone. Peace and love from the Atlantean Intergalactic Consciousness. I'm Grandmaster Thor Templar, and as usual, I am your beacon of gnosis in a pock-ridden, disease-filled swamp sewer of reality. What I'm going to cover now is intergalactic, and how what gnosis is, which is the finding of truth, which of course then you find your inner being, you understand your place in the universe, and how everything is intermeshed together, and it is the ultimate state of consciousness and joy and well-being. And that's important to understand with any state of consciousness you reach. Ultimately, it is the ultimate path to peace. And that nebulous and much misunderstood concept of inner love and being. Now, to limit yourself to earthbound consciousness and whatever is connected to it in its common realities is a horrible mistake to do. I mean, originally when the Guild started over 35 years ago, the concept was to grab as much gnosis as possible, knowledge, pure truth, not opinion, not dogma. And as such, you certainly couldn't name your organization based in any one particular field. So, if you were to name yourself after your magical style, if you had one particular style, which in itself is creating a box, I'm a ritual magician, I'm a runic magician, I'm a Wicca, well, how nice. How big is that box? Will your shoes fit in it? So, it's really a very low mentality way of thinking, and this kind of thinking is never going to get us anywhere. And we've come to a reality now that we've come out of our holes yet again in this phase of enlightenment, of human consciousness, of fighting against the ape mentality that is prevalent in this world, we Atlanteans. We non-Earth-based Atlanteans, because Atlanteans weren't birthed from this planet, they came from a galactic reality. Is foolish to put yourself in any little box and then try and work from there. We may be part of this reality. We are involved in it. We have to deal with the physicalities of it. But that doesn't make us as being integrated into it. We're dealing with the circumstances that we have to with being here. And every occult scientist is seeking the control of these negative circumstances and to evolve past that into their own higher state of evolution and consciousness, and ultimately succumbing this hell plane and ascending out of it to a much higher existence. There is no staying here. There is no changing here. There's only ascending out of here. And this is all part of understanding your place in the universe, not your place on little earthy, not your place in your little common religion and your worshiping of some goofball in the sky, not all those ridiculous consciousness that are stuck in with the ape consciousness being that you are constantly having around you. They want to pressurize you into their molds. But the great necessity as we move on into the next level of occultism, the next level really of consciousness, where we finally been able to breach the gap between primitive, destructive living and the fact that we really have little or no control over things. And we have moved dramatically past that, or at least have the capacities now. and have formed what we would consider some sort of a civilization, even though that civilization is out of control and destructive now. Now it's causing the demise yet again in this cycle of building and destruction. And it's another reason not to be sold into the earth plane reality, is that it is very fleeting and passes, and it doesn't pass in millions of years like evolutionary structures do, or the formation of oil in the ground that took millions, or the bones of the past dinosaurs who were here for hundreds of millions of years. It doesn't take that time. In human society structures, we're talking about a few hundred years are very critical in what happens to society. Whether there be much of a society in another 100 years, or how structurally changed that will be very interesting, or maybe a couple of 100 years. I mean, we have very serious issues that could easily wipe off all of humanity, even the face of the earth. It wouldn't take much. And we're slowly doing that with the toxicity of this planet in general, and with filthy nuclear power and other things which are leaking like sieves all over the world. But we have important issues. 130 people died in a terrorist attack, but the 50 nuclear power plants in that same country that are leaking all the time, who cares? So, we need to bridge this earth being gap. Now, you can be a wise man, reach the state of Buddha. I don't know how wise ultimately was. I kind of like Buddhism, even though I've never known a Buddhist that was worth a shit, particularly Western Buddhists. But you can reach a high level, but if you're still based in earthbound consciousness, if you haven't contacted and connected to the intergalactic consciousness realm, the consciousness realm from the universe, then you are just in this tiniest of all boxes, being in this earth reality, thinking that, because you've been on a spiritual path, because you've reached, quote, Godhead, you've reached Buddha level, you have ascended through Tibetan understanding, as Westerners foolishly think that these paths are somehow superior to Western beliefs. And of course, these all came from Atlantis anyway, and all the Western beliefs did. And society as we know it today, in its more civilized structure that allows the advancement of both the spiritual and the scientific in a fairly well blended, came from the basic Western European societies, particularly from the Atlantean tribes of Northern Europe, who have built everything as we know of today. But that's another subject we'll get into, but in another lecture. But if you want to stay on this earth plane, expect the answers to come from that wise man, then you are sadly mistaken, and his particular connection to some nebulous spirit entity. Well, there is a oftentimes stated cosmic energy. We like to use the term intergalactic. I think it what does cosmic mean? Cosmic is another word like psychic. It really has bad. We need to finite words. Words are very important because they should be triggering mental and spiritual states within you. And if they become so diffused, so overused, so crapped upon by the masses, they lose any significance whatsoever. And this is outlined, of course, in the simulac, where something becomes very sacred, such as a symbol or a cross, and then it becomes common day usage and ends up on your dashboard of your car as a little plastic cross. So we need to get past this ridiculous state of trying to gather information from ancient sources which have done nothing, particularly those that we can access in the normal means, going back 10, 20,000 years to some great societies, and they did build some civilization at their time, but they still lacked so much. The ancient Egyptians, the ancient Sumerians, the ancient Aztecs, and some of the more primitive cultures throughout Europe at that time, who were growing in their own aspects. But all these societies fell into horrible decay. Why? Because they stayed within the consciousness of the international or earth-based. So as long as we continue to stay in this kind of consciousness, thinking that somehow we're going to commune with some God-made entity, or man-made God form-like entity, to say that better, is absurd. And as a person who has reached gnosis and has researched so many different gurus and God-men, they are horribly fouled. They are, in the end, can all be summed up as very human. And that's pretty much the saddest thing that anybody can call you. You may come from a certain culture, you may not like some slang or detrimental terms. In the end, though, if somebody calls you a human, that is the ultimate insult. And that's all because of the fact that we're living in this now age of distributed information, distributed international opinion. And that's what it is. It's information, it's opinion. It's not wisdom, it's not knowledge. That we somehow now have access to better information. Well, like everything, it really depends on the source. And if that source is connected to a bad source, the same old crappy information that they have distilled into their own reality and may have brought it up to you in a better or more interesting fashion, doesn't mean that that does anything. Well, we really need to think beyond this trap of this particular planet and all of its consciousness. And we must get into intergalactic consciousness. Intergalactic. And I use that term because it means more than one galaxy, and that ultimately means the universe. But again, I don't like the term universe because that's another overused term. And again, words are important. People don't understand terms like, technically unlimited. I mean, unlimited is a mind-boggling term. Well, it is, which means a lot, don't it? No, it doesn't mean a lot. It means never exhaustible. Now, the grains of sand on the earth can be counted if there's quadrillion, whatever that number is, can be counted. Unlimited means it ain't never get counted because there is no limit to it. So, understanding terminology is important, and these things drive organizations and those that come to it as well. So, having an intergalactic consciousness, getting information from the universe, not from the cosmos. Again, one of those terrible words, as I've just mentioned. Intergalactic consciousness is critically important for us to take the next step. We have all this information. It is the age of understanding. We have all this information, all this technology, both in the spiritual and in the scientific realm, which needs to join to create the next level consciousness, to solve all our problems here, and to ultimately work on ourselves as spiritual beings, which nobody apparently ever does because they feel that the answers in this world are too complicated and too difficult. And the funny thing about everything is that if you've really done any serious research on any particular subject, the answers are pretty easy and pretty straightforward. It's not we don't have, it's not the age of not understanding and of we don't get it. It's the point is that we have to understand what we now have all this information for. So to better state that, it's not that we need to seek more information because we're so confused by what we have now. We just have to use the information we have, understand it better, and apply it, and everything is solved. We have the answer. There's not a single need in the world today that has not already been solved. And that may be in itself something that an international thought form can't wrap your head around. Now, an intergalactic thinker understands that because an intergalactic thinker is working out of the state of gnosis, or pure knowledge, otherwise known as truth. And this is what we need to stress in life, not some sort of political ideology, not somebody's religious beliefs, not somebody's pseudoscientific beliefs, or even scientific beliefs. We need to work out of intergalactic consciousness. We need to work from truth. Does this work? And we need to stop putting price tags on things and just do it. Money is a contrived tool used by those who want to control and dominate, and it has no real value in life in general. It's all made up anyway. That's even further amusing that world powers decide to give the control and the sovereignty of their countries away to a bank, which is really just mind-boggling. And it's mind-boggling to the intergalactic thinker who doesn't think, well, solve our monetary problem. We need to go back to the gold standard. That's a pretty international way of thinking. That's the most stupidest thing in the world. Going back to a gold standard. Well, how much we dig out of the ground and then we base, and that limits things. It's the most stupidest thing possibly you can do. As well as everything based on gold, including the ridiculous investment in gold, which is the most joke of them all. But we'll talk about that another time. But the joke of it all, of life, is that that's the kind of stupidity out there, and that's supposed to be the alternative thought to the actual not being controlled. So the whole idea is, we go back to a standard that doesn't give control of these. Of course it gives control. So that's more of that stupid thinking that people then think is alternative or different because they are thinking a little different than the controllers, but they really are not. That's all part of the same thing. It's only the intergalactic person, the intergalactic thinker, the intergalactic consciousness, which can evolve you to a powerful person and an ascended being, which is really the key to all empowerment, is being this ascended being that isn't part of the game. That's above the game, that laughs at the game, that is not controlled or encompassed by the game, and operates on its own personal level while having to use a society structure. So it's easy to just state that, don't deal with society, but we can't do that. And, it's amazing if you think about anything that you are consuming or using today. I was thinking about that the other day in a state of gnosis, and do you know how many people it takes to create even the simplest products, even to get you that tomato to your supermarket? And it's not just the tomato. And you go, well, somebody had to grow it. Yeah, I get that. Well, it's not just somebody had to grow it. Seed had to come from someplace. The land had to come from someplace. The water had to come from someplace. Somebody had to do the thing. Somebody had to run the machinery. Somebody had to build the machinery. Somebody had to make that machinery. Somebody had to take the metal out of the ground to make that machinery. Somebody then has to transport that after it's picked put it in a box, ship it on it, put a label on it, deliver it to a store. The person in the store has to take it out and put it out there. You then have to pick it up and walk it over to F company. And that doesn't, the end of it, you had to do something to get the money to buy that. And, the creation of one simple little product takes tens of thousands, if not, if you go back through the chain, it's probably millions of people had to do something to create this. So we can't just step away from society. Of course, the higher ascended being steps more and more because he's dependent upon less and less on these society structures, even down to eating, which is a human addiction and not necessarily a necessity. But nothing that we have or have achieved today, which has been based on this international thinking, the scientists from around the world, whatever you want to say they are, the religiously, whatever it is, has been based in human consciousness and really hasn't added up to much of anything. There's only been a huge spike in advancement in the use of to facilitate intergalactic thinking in the last few years. The mass amount of access to information in the computer world is a fantastic boom, while it is also one of the greatest annoyances in anyone's lives. The exchange of information, the possibilities of translation, the publishing of your beliefs, your thoughts, your information can now be done instantly and basically for free. Now, the cost factors, which are so much of a problem in the past to produce any kind of information, and the needing such a complicated distribution system, is now been eliminated. And as usual, if you're someone who's under 40, and a lot of people have never ran businesses, so they don't know how complicated it is in general. I mean, the amount of things you have to do just to put a business together is just incredible, not to mention all the little permits and forms and taxes, but just the fact of running that business. If you're sending something in the mail order, you've got to have the packages, the packing, the product, the labels. You've got to have the system to collect those orders. You've got to haul that over to someplace else who's going to then send it for you, whether that's the post office or some other. So, I mean, it's quite a complicated process. Well, it's not the hardest thing in the world. It's far from the simplest to run a mail organization. And mail order has been huge for 30, 40 years, and technically still is, because all Amazon and all these other big internet businesses are that sell you common products. They're just nothing more than a mail order house. But all that for the little guy has ended. You can now distribute information at little to no cost. And still with all this, very little new is. People are still reselling public domain and books that have been around for a long time. It's amazing how little comes out when there is all this availability, and past is still being there because very few people know anything anyway. So they're still going back to books that are 30 and 40 years old that mostly have very little value from what we know now. So that dated information tends to be lessen and lessen in value in a completely new world that we're living in. So that's all part of old world thinking. And of course, we're now reaching a stage, since the technological age of being able to do all that, we now need to be thinking much more intergalactic. With all this information that's out there, it needs to be understood, compiled, tested, and applied. And if you don't do any one of all of those steps, one of them, it's a waste of time. Having information and not being able to test it, is the information valid? And the only way that you can tell if information is valid is that you have to test it. And once it's tested and proven that it works, for you, other people have to test it as well. And then this is something that a percentage of people can probably use successfully. Probably not everybody, because, when you get into the occult sciences, it's very individualistic. But a lot of things are like that. I mean, how many people can use certain computer programs? Well, some people use them and other ones can't. So, I mean, that's all part of society, and the fact that occultism is put up on this higher level, that it should have some work better and manifest faster than everything else, is a little bit ridiculous. Not a little bit, it is. But all of that is this common world thinking that we need to bridge. We need to get into the intergalactic mind. We need to expand past this tiny little blue rock in the middle of nowhere on the outer edges of the universe that basically is 2 billion years younger than most of the other universe, so the scientists tell us. 2 billion years. So intergalactic thinking is 2 billion years ahead of the thinking that is on this planet now. Well, I think that's a pretty damn good head start. When people talk about those ignorant, in-the-box internationalists who think in that realm of there could possibly be alien life and come here. No way. And then, of course, they try and balance that with complete and total logic, being the fact that there are trillions of planets out there, and they're at least 2 billion years older than us, and they were not able to figure out how to get around the universe because Feinstein said, we can only go this fast. Can I pull my pants up now? Because he had them down most of the time, the little horny devil he was. I can only go down this time because we can't go more than this fast. Nah, only go so fast. I can only pedal on the bike so fast. Well, why should man be able to go faster? So we have this kind of idiocy thinking, and then these people are propped up as the genius of them all, coming up with a theory that is complete and total bogus and was known to be bogus at the time it was adopted. Max Bohr, the physicist who discovered quantum physics, was giving his theory of quantum physics then, and was arguing with the medical the scientific industry, their little hero boy Einstein, and because of the ignorancy and the low level of Earth consciousness of the scientists, they bought into more with, well, of course things can't go at super speeds. Well, we all know that the transfer of information, in particular, the transfer is instantaneous over any distance. This is proven now by scientists and has been for years and years and years. So, but if you buy into that, if you give credence, if you're so foolish to think that the whole rest of the universe couldn't figure out because we haven't been able to do it, and there's no possibility. Why could there possibly be life forms? And we've already went to other planets. We already have data gathering tools in space, machines in space, already from this ignoramus culture that we are based in. We've already done that and going to the outer planets in our little solar system here. And this has all been done in advancements that are less than 100 years. It's really mind-boggling when you see this massive jump from the 1950s to our present time. So you're talking about 60 years where everything has happened. But, of course, no other societies could. I guess they just have to burn things like we do, and, they got oil burning spaceships out there, and, they bring canisters of, barrels of oil that they got from the desert, and they put them on the ships, and they're doing this. I mean, this is the kind of ignoramus thinking that people do. When we have technologies that far surpass that, and we are using to this day anti-gravity, interplanetary crafts are operational right now, and anybody who knows anything knows that. It's just a fact. And well. It ain't in the news. So the idea is that these kind of understandings are people that have intergalactic thinking, who are thinking past the dinosaur ape-man level, and these are the people that will create the great societies of the future. If we leave our thinking to this even international thinking that somehow we're going to learn things by sharing data with people in Russia and China and other places, and this somehow is going to move everybody forward, well, we've done that, and we've almost peaked at that because of the pressures to stop the kind of flow of information from one society to another. There should be a planetary language, which there kind of is, but it's not really enforced. which is English, but everything should be published in people's own home languages and in English, so that everywhere in the world, every street sign should be in whatever language you come from and in English, so that if you popped up in Mongolia at 2 o'clock in the morning, you would be able to get around, communicate, and be able to read everything there without any further help. But that doesn't help the international mind, who wants to keep things in its highly corrupted state. So it isn't good enough now to think about this universal language, this or this universal consciousness that is all based on what we think as the ape perverted beings that we are. We need to think past that, and we need to connect to and seek knowledge from these intergalactic sources, way past ourselves, way past our basic even comprehension at this time. Because that's where the answers will be found. They're not going to be found in the same old. Because even though we have solutions for all of our problems here, they are not utilized because of the ape being, ape thinking, ape consciousness that we are stuck in, which refuses us to use things that even are for our own benefit. And people think that if we don't use this, if my society, which there are so many of them around the world, which are based on the use of supplying oil, mostly for generating energy, which is the worst thing you could possibly do with oil, since it is so valuable to use to make so many other things, that their societies fall apart. Well, what am I supposed to do? Starve and die here? If we don't use petroleum oil to burn as gasoline, then that means my society falls down. Well, that means that oil generally would probably go up in price, and certain other commodities would be priced higher. Things would balance out, and of course there's so many other things that would be able to be done because of the fact that energy would be free. And one of the things that keeps everybody in the world down is they don't have the energy to have the tools and appliances they need to achieve the goals they want, because it is either unavailable or very expensive. Now, this kind of minuscule mental midget thinking is all part of this earth-based tiny little box of reality that everyone is stuck in, regardless of you think you're a big thinker. You're not a big thinker unless you're an intergalactic thinker. We don't want to even think in this galaxy. We don't want to think in the next galaxy. We want to think and understand and get concepts and information and enlightenment from every galaxy and the entire universe. That's what solves problems, not stupidity thinking of your own personal race, your own personal religion, your own personal nationalistic viewpoints, your own personal reality, whatever that may be. That's nonsense and is self-serving and ultimately self-destructing. So it's time to move on. It is time for the next step, not only in the occult sciences, which as usual leads the way, but it's time for the next step in evolution of the human consciousness on this earth to expand itself and to reunite with the consciousness that created the human force to begin with, and that's intergalactic consciousness. So with that, there is no reality until the occult scientist creates it. Question everything. Believe nothing. Question all authority. Trust absolutely no one. Learn it, be it, do it, and let the guild be your guide.